Okay, so as you're making your way in, I want to introduce a video which we wanted to show in the earlier part, but we just ran out of time. But it's a very good video about agroforestry in the Sahel and how it's helping farmers produce better crops and how it contributes to fighting climate change. So let's just run that video while you're coming in. Thank you.
Chekfal est agriculteur à Djadjan, un village au centre du Sénégal. En cette journée de septembre, il prend soin de ses terres car la récolte du mil approche.
Bu nu toogee ba xam ne góob nañu dugub bi ba mu jeex ko defee tombé gerte gi ñor ndox bi wàññeeku waaw bu nuy dagg dugub ji mooy dañu koy daane ba pare dagg ko roñ ko yóbbu ci kër yi waaw su ko defee diir boobu gerte gi dina ñor commencé teqi.
Dans cette région sahélienne, la pluie ne tombe que 3 mois par an. 3 mois pour cultiver de quoi nourrir sa famille toute l'année.
Jamono yi ci ginnaaw soo taxawoon fii da nga naan lii du baax parce que boo ndox amul dara amul.
Au Sahel, le changement climatique rend la saison humide de plus en plus aléatoire. Mais un autre phénomène menace la sécurité alimentaire de ces populations. Les sols sont de moins en moins fertiles.
Ici, on peut noter une forte croissance démographique de la population. Et cette forte croissance de la population donc, a des impacts sur l'environnement. Là, je peux citer la dégradation des terres qui est liée au fait qu'il n'y a plus certaines pratiques comme la jachère, ce qui entraîne une baisse de la fertilité des sols et ça a donc des conséquences négatives sur les récoltes.
L'agroforesterie est une solution pour lutter contre les effets du changement climatique et restaurer la fertilité des sols. C'est une conviction partagée par les agronomes et par la plupart des agriculteurs.
Pour moi, l'agroforesterie fait partie des quelques techniques incontournables pour affronter les questions du changement climatique, que ce soit les questions de mitigation ou les questions d'adaptation.
Les systèmes agroforestiers offrent de nombreux bénéfices, certains connus depuis toujours, d'autres révélés récemment par la science.
La première chose, c'est que ça permet de piéger du carbone dans des zones et effectivement, il y a beaucoup plus de carbone dans la biomasse d'un arbre que dans la biomasse de céréales en général. L'autre chose, c'est un effet de restitution de vapeur. Et on s'est aperçu d'un phénomène dont avaient parlé nos ancêtres, mais qu'ils n'étaient pas capables de démontrer à l'époque. On s'est aperçu que les forêts étaient capables de propager les pluies.
Arbre clé de la région, le Federbia albida. Cet acacia améliore la fertilité du sol, fournit du bois aux populations et du fourrage au bétail pendant la saison sèche.
Il a cette caractéristique extraordinaire, c'est qu'il est à phénologie inversée. C'est-à-dire qu'en fait, il fait ses feuilles en saison sèche, juste au moment où les éleveurs ont besoin de fourrage.
Mais ce n'est pas tout, le Federbia est capable d'absorber l'azote de l'air et de le restituer aux cultures.
Et puis alors, il y a autre chose qui est cachée. C'est qu'il a des systèmes racinaires très profonds. Il va utiliser des ressources dont les cultures n'ont pas besoin. Et mieux que ça, il est probable qu'il soit capable de remonter ces ressources d'eau et de minéraux vers la surface.
Un autre bénéfice rendu par les arbres vient d'être révélé par des scientifiques du CIRAD avec ses partenaires. La présence d'arbres dans un champ limite les attaques d'une chenille, la mineuse de l'épi de mil.
On est dans des milieux qui sont complètement exempts de pesticides. On a une biodiversité qui est importante et qui va participer à la régulation des ravageurs.
Les dégâts causés par la chenille sont bien plus importants sur certaines parcelles que sur d'autres. Pour comprendre cette variabilité, les chercheurs ont croisé des données écologiques avec l'analyse du paysage. Thierry Brévaux et son doctorant en écologie, Armand Douceau, ont passé en revue les prédateurs de la chenille, oiseaux, chauves-souris et insectes.
Ces espèces de chauves-souris, ils consomment les papillons, c'est-à-dire donc dans ce cas, ils vont éviter la ponte, contrairement aux oiseaux qui vont consommer des larves au moment où il y a déjà des galeries sous les épis.
De son côté, Valérie Sotti a décrit les différents éléments du paysage à partir d'images satellites haute résolution.
On a observé que là où on avait une densité d'arbres importante, on avait aussi une régulation naturelle importante. Alors pourquoi? C'est que ces arbres joueraient un rôle refuge aux ennemis naturels.
L'agroforesterie permet donc aussi de protéger naturellement les cultures contre les ravageurs. Cette découverte est un argument supplémentaire pour inciter les agriculteurs à conserver des arbres dans leurs champs.
chaque jour noo ngi ci woon ba fii ma nekk sax taxaw di wax ak yow sax maa ngi ci woon sax di turwe lim ma doon wax moom.
L'agroforesterie cumule de nombreux avantages, stockage de carbone, adaptation au changement climatique, maintien de la fertilité des sols, protection des cultures.
C'est une solution qui est un modèle d'adaptation pour les pays tropicaux, mais qu'on peut tout à fait transplanter dans les pays tempérés. C'est une mémoire que nous avions dans nos pays, par exemple l'agroforesterie des bocages. Et en fait, c'est quelque chose qu'on a perdu et qu'on a hâte de retrouver.
Very good. So a video there about the benefits of agroforestry in the Sahel. So for those of you who are coming in, can you please take your seats, because we're going to begin now with our next panel session. I hope you enjoyed your lunch, that you got to have a little bit of the sunshine out there, and importantly as well that you got to do the much important networking. So this session is on agroforestry, food security and nutrition. And as with the previous session, I'm going to hand over to our chair, who will chair this session, and I'll be moderating the questions and answers when we get the time to do that. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our chair for this session, Patrick Worms, who is a Senior Science Policy Advisor with World Agroforestry, and he is the President of the European Agroforestry Federation. And before that, Patrick was a genetic engineer who saw the light. I'm going to hand over, and he is going to introduce his panelists. Patrick.
Karen, thank you very much. Does this work? Can you hear me?
No? Can we turn Patrick's microphone on, please? If not, Patrick, you can use the lectern here if it's not working, until they get that sorted. Oh, I think it's on now.
Okay.
Yeah. Technical stuff is always challenging.
Ça marche?
Can you
Génial.
hear Patrick? Can you
Yeah,
hear? Say a couple of words, Patrick.
Wonderful. I'm deeply honored to have been asked to chair this panel because I came to agroforestry late. I was just a normal lobbyist in Brussels, shillying for every evil corporation under the sun that wanted to put itself in the right light when I met Dennis Garrity. Dennis, are you here somewhere? Yeah? Well, there you go. This guy, beware. This guy is dangerous. He takes people who are living their lives and he turns them into convinced agroforesters. And amongst my panel, I have one person that seems to have made a journey which is even more extreme than mine. I'm talking of Gary May, who is the Chancellor of Davis University, the biggest university in the University of California system, and you're an electrical engineer, and yet here you are about to tell us about nutrition and food security. Today's panel is going to be divided into 3 sessions. We're going to start with Saul Morris, who is the Director of Program Services at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Thank you very much, GAIN. 27 years of career in nutrition and health planning. Children's Investment Fund Foundation, the Gates Foundation. He is family too. He was at IFPRI before he left us. And I'm told he's a fantastic Mexican cook. So if you ever find yourself in London, angle for an invitation. That's going to be followed by Ramni Jamnadas. Ramni is a Kenyan geneticist, and she's running our global program on tree genetics, which is not just about the boring genetics of trees, but about what trees can do to improve food and nutrition. And I don't know about you, but if you go to Nairobi and you're looking to experience the most beautiful home in the world, it has got to be Ramni's. Such artwork, such a fantastic garden, it's just unbelievable. After these 2 speakers, we are going to have a break, and if I feel so minded, I will ask them one question. But more importantly, Karen will get you to ask many, many questions, make them sharp, make them incisive, make them informative. And then we will move over to a panel within a panel run by Andrew Campbell, who is a farmer, who is managing a silvopastoral system, and as a hobby, also happens to be the boss of ACR. Andrew is here with 3 of his guests, and they are Catherine Muturi, a colleague from ICRAF, who is a research scientist, who was a teacher, and who decided that human beings were boring compared to trees, and became a botanist and an ecophysiologist. We have Kami Melvani from Darwin University. That's pretty much all I know about you, Kami, so I'll let Andrew do the introduction. And Rowan Reid, who has written a fantastic book that he gave me and then took away again. I'm very, very unhappy about that, about how to grow trees and make money from it. And he's going to tell us how that works. Then we'll have a second break, and we'll have a second session of questions and answers moderated by Karen. And then we will wrap up with Gary May, who is a chancellor at the University of Davis, the biggest campus in the University of California system. And when I read the sheer number of honors and publications and accolades I became first jealous, then depressed. But we'll finish with a guy who's going to wrap it all up, Patrick Caron. And make sure to have your headphones, because Patrick is going to talk in French. And Patrick is the chair of the high-level panel of experts on the UN Committee on Food Security. He also happens to be the VP of the University of Montpellier. So a stellar cast for you today. And without further ado, let me ask our Mexican cook to tell us about nutrition.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk to you today about the contribution of agroforestry to improve nutrition. It's really a thrill to be with you here today. I work at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. We're a Swiss-based organization, and we work on trying to transform food systems so that they can deliver more nutritious food for all people, especially the most vulnerable. And it's really special to be here today. One of the things that we say in the nutrition community is that we talk too much to other nutrition people, and we don't get out and talk to other people who have other interests and other agendas that are very much aligned with ours. And I imagine the same thing is true in your discipline. So this is a great moment for having some cross-disciplinary discussions about where our two agendas meet. So you may have seen yesterday, if you were walking in the Esplanade, some activists who were trying to persuade us that we should be eating less meat in our diets. And they were using environmental arguments to show that the degree of meat that we consume in our diet is completely unsustainable. It's a draw, as you know, on water resources. It creates greenhouse gases. It depletes soil nutrients. But they didn't actually mention the other argument for changing the way that we eat, which is the health consequences. And if you look at this graph in front of you, you'll see the 10 most important risk factors for mortality and disease in a particular country, of which 5 are related to diet, either directly, the dietary risks, or indirectly through things like blood pressure or obesity. And in fact, you'll be surprised to learn that this country is actually France. France is not renowned for having one of the world's most unhealthy diets. So you can only imagine what this graphic looks like if I were to present you another country that has an even more unhealthy diet. So recently, the leading medical journal, The Lancet, together with the EAT Foundation, brought together a really strong commission to try and look at diets from 2 perspectives simultaneously, from the perspective of the environment and from the perspective of health. And they tried to come up with some recommendations about what would be a much better diet that we should all be aiming to move towards if we're to help solve the problems on both of those dimensions. And believe it or not, this modeling exercise has never been done before. Nobody has tried to comprehensively bring together the health side with the environment side. And they published this very interesting, what they called a global healthy reference diet. And you can go and look at their 50-page publication in The Lancet and have a look at what they say. But they particularly mention 3 groups of foods that are obviously tree-based foods. So there's fruits, there's tree nuts, and interestingly, they actually called out palm oil and suggest that we should be eating up to 7 grams a day of palm oil. 7 grams is not very much, so you won't really notice it. These, both fruits and nuts, are grossly underconsumed in all regions of the world if you look at their recommendations for how much they should contribute to a healthy and sustainable diet. So I'm going to zoom into a few of these issues. I'm going to start with fruits, again, from a nutrition perspective. So recently, or not so recently, 2004, there was a review of the association between fruit and a non-communicable disease, chronic diseases. And what they were able to show is that quite substantial, actually, consumption of fruit, 3 servings a day, will reduce the risk of heart disease by 13%. That's really quite a substantial reduction. Interestingly, they didn't show any impact on cancer, but the heart disease impact is really quite important and shows what it can contribute to our diet. But fruit actually is also very important for children's nutrition. And in the organization I work in, we look a lot at children in the developing world who have more traditionally malnutrition, undernutrition issues. And a recent piece of work by Derek Heddy at IFPRI has shown that actually fruit consumption by young children is one of the most impactful ways of preventing undernutrition, particularly stunting. Stunting is a measure that nutritionists use. It's poor linear growth, and it's very highly associated with developmental problems and poor schooling outcomes and lower income earning potential in the future. And you can see from these tabulations that, particularly if you look at that very vulnerable age group of 12 to 17 months, fruit consumption is the single easiest way to help prevent the development of stunting and chronic undernutrition. Even more important than animal source foods, which have been called out far more frequently. I should also mention that for years now, trials have shown that consumption of vitamin A, which is highly prevalent in fruits, is a good way of reducing mortality in young children and can reduce mortality by 12% also. Are we there yet? We so aren't. These are the levels of consumption of vitamin A-rich fruits and vegetables in young children around the world. Look at South Asia, in that 12 to 17-month-old age group, just 1/3 of children eating fruit on a daily basis. So there's a huge way to go before we reach the levels that will be effective in improving nutritional status in young children. So what are we going to do about that? Well, I guess that you will be talking extensively about bringing fruit farming to new areas during the course of this week's Congress and about increasing yields. But there are other approaches as well. Since you'll be dwelling on the first one, I thought I would mention a few of the other ones. The one that's particularly interesting is reducing seasonality and supply of fruits. Also very interesting to try and reduce post-harvest losses. We go to all of this effort to ensure a healthy production of fruits, and then half of them rot away on the way to market and are never consumed by anybody, or all the mangoes fall on the ground at the same time, and there's so many of them that they can't possibly be eaten. There's also wholesale interventions, retail interventions, and particularly important, trying to persuade consumers to actually be interested in some of these products. I was interested to try some of the products that were available yesterday in the stalls upstairs, and I was thinking as I was eating them, I confess not particularly enjoying them, whether a really good consumer-focused piece of work would help guide the development of products that would have a strong route to market. So some of your colleagues were telling me in advance of this nutrition about the food tree portfolio approach. From a nutritionist perspective, this is incredibly exciting and interesting because what we traditionally see is, as I mentioned, the mango trees everywhere that drop all their fruit at the same time of the year, and then the remaining 11 months of the year, populations have no access to these highly nutritious foods. So this approach, which identifies a set of trees which can produce fruit all the year round, is really one that will go a long way to solving nutrition problems, because it will ensure that there will be vitamin A and vitamin C available right away across the year. Though the human body can store vitamin A, it can't store it for a whole year. So you need to keep replenishing it at regular basis. Another one that we're interested in again, perhaps a little bit more tangential to your interests, is these new technologies that can preserve fruit and vegetables for much longer and make sure that they get to a market in good timing. And these new, incredibly cheap, small-scale refrigerated transport options use chemical processes to cool, and with a few hours of electrical charging can provide enough cooling to actually keep things frozen for 24 hours. We also wanted to mention just a few of the indirect routes that we can improve nutrition through agroforestry interventions. And I was just walking around the posters this morning and noticing that there's actually a lot of posters talking about fodder and how a judicious choice of fodder will improve the yield of important nutritious products. So I had picked out this study by Steinsham, which had shown that by changing the type of fodder for small ruminants, you can increase the volume of milk produced by 30 to 35%, and you can also increase the fat content of that milk. So if you can do those two things, that's a big step for nutrition. Milk is an incredibly important food for nutritional status all around the world. And one of the concerns about milk is that it's produced in as you well know, in an environmentally unsustainable way at the moment. These kinds of interventions using fodder can be a double win. They can help the nutritional results and they can help the environment as well. FAO has looked into this and identified trees which can improve milk content and milk yield. And particularly when combined with improved varieties of cattle, the impact is really quite striking. Another one is, again, I was noticing quite a few posters on this topic, intercropping. These are cocoa yam. They traditionally in West Africa grow in between or underneath the cocoa trees. And they're a highly, highly nutritious dark green leafy vegetable, and you can also eat the tuber. Both of them are very tasty. But what we found in our work is that, unfortunately, the taste for these products is disappearing. And we need to re-educate these local populations to appreciate what they actually have. I don't think
that's Julian's.
That was mine. And it's got stuck on that, so I'll wind up. Time is up anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Saul. I am very happy my 8-year-old daughter is not in this room, because if she had heard what you had to say about palm oil, I would not be able to keep Nutella out of the house anymore. Thank you very much for that. Ramni, tree fruit portfolios is something you know something about, isn't it?
I've never met him, so I'll be delighted to talk about it again.
Wonderful. Go right ahead, please. Thank you very much.
Right, good afternoon. I hope you had a lovely lunch. Yes, a lovely breakfast and a lovely tea break. Well, this map is self-explanatory. I will not go into the statistics, but with climate change, this is going to get even worse. Those are the hunger spots. And I don't want to go into statistics, but just to raise our consciousness for this issue, that 66 million children in the developing world today have gone to school without breakfast, and we've already had 3 meals. They went, on my continent, Africa, 27 million of them are children who went to school without breakfast. They may get some scraps at school. So agroforestry can contribute to resolving this problem. We know there are 1.2 billion people in the world who practice agroforestry practices. And there is the ubiquitous products and services that agroforestry systems can provide, but there is serious lack of impact information. And just to leave you with the point that women contribute to 60 to 80% of smallholder production of African food, and they really are the change agents for nutrition security. So do invest in women. Agroforestry for food security and nutrition. We know that agroforestry produces products for food, health, and income, and services for sustainability and resilience. And there are many frameworks that have been developed, and this one is a recent one by the high-level panel of experts. And there's WFP, and there is all the donors, and they really build on 4 main pillars to address food security and nutrition. It's all about availability, about accessibility, about utilization, and about sustainability and resilience. I mean, we can't address all the challenges, but the key challenges I may touch upon today are, the problem is the simplification of our diets. We've simplified the diets using 10 crops, maybe. We need diversity, and I would say plant it, pick it, or buy it. And that could be a nice proposal concept for all of us here. Okay, plant it, pick it, or buy it. There's poor productivity due to germplasm, soils, water, temperature, capacity. There's the neglected foods, Roger, Cinderella, underutilized or orphans, access to quality planting material, and of course, I believe governance and policy, behavior change at all levels. What is good for us, and how should we do it? The food tree portfolios, I'm delighted Sol showed them because they come from my labs. Stephen McMullen, who's been spending 5-6 years developing them. It's really food tree and crop portfolios to target harvest and nutrient gaps, addressing seasonality and nutrition gaps, identifying when are the hunger gaps, and identifying those crops, whether it's trees or annuals, which will fruit in that season. What do they bring? Vitamin A, folate, vitamin C, what is it? And she has developed this for East Africa now for 6 different agroecological zones. The challenge is, of course, the ecological suitability of the species, because the ecological species, so we have the right species for the right place. Vegetation maps for Africa developed by Roland Kint. And now we're working with World Vegetable to identify, besides the indigenous fruit trees or food trees, as I like to call them, what other crops can grow in complementary to those trees? What other species? What are the cereals? So please collaborate with us, because World Agroforestry, currently my program works on trees, and now World Vegetable with vegetables. Anyone who wants to join the portfolios, join us. And of course, the underutilized trees. I had the pleasure of finding Roger Leakey, who has been championing this work, his slides. And he's promoted them all along, because we know about those 10 crops which are really one of the reasons for the cause of some of the problem of undernutrition or malnutrition, hidden hunger. Some of the indigenous species, we know that they have more micronutrients than the exotics I find on my continent. We find 5 or 6 exotics which are mainstreamed into food systems. There's things like baobab, there's marula, 5 to 3 times more vitamin C than oranges, which were never on our continent before. And there's hundreds of other species like that. I asked Roland the other day, how many food tree species do we have in Africa, Roland? And he goes, do you know, food tree species, 800 that we know of, and all that we don't know of. 800, how many in our markets? 5, 6, and most of them not African. What's going to happen to them? They're disappearing very fast, very nutritious species. We need investment. So yes, we're trying to domesticate them. 130 species World Agroforestry has been involved with, but funding is always intermittent. So what we do is we put them into gene banks. And funding, there is a problem too, because they say, show use. How can you show use for something that has not been developed? Those species are still wild or transient. They need investments. So coming to investments. So we are told, no, we need markets first before we invest in trees. So here's a species where there's a market, $200 million worth of market just for today. They need, Alan Black, someone's rushing through my... This needed investment. Unilever came to us and said, help us domesticate this wild species, which produces very healthy fat, high in oleic acid. They invested in the supply chains. The wild harvested oil goes to Rotterdam, and it's been a great success in France, I hear, and Portugal. But the trees are still at the early stage of domestication because no investment went there. And yet all the big companies are waiting to jump on this. This is just one example where there is a market, and there is a market. So we need to do both things together, develop markets and invest in improving these crops. So we're trying to improve these crops through a faster, expedited way of breeding them, the African Orphan Crops Consortium, trying to sequence 101 African crops, indigenous and naturalized, crops that 42 countries in Africa selected. And through this will be in the public domain. And I'd like to tell the Chancellor from Davis, actually, this is one of the key-led programs which your university has also helped us set up. So the African Plant Breeding Academy, where 250 African breeders with masters and PhDs are learning the technology of using genomics to expedite breeding of some of our species. How are we going to, I mentioned this is a multi-sectorial issue. It's not only about species, it's also about the soils, it's about species suitability, it's about the water, it's the climate. So we're trying to put all this information together for agroforestry species on a switchboard, one-stop shop for information. There are 32 web-based databases that we've collated. Go and visit it. We're trying to populate it and become a partner. So moving ahead, thinking of the role of agroforestry and trees for food security and nutrition, we have, in the last, about 5 years ago, pulled together forests, trees, and agroforestry program, where nutrition has become a priority now, only recently, and looking at understanding the links between agroforestry and forests, and the links with global markets and the sustainability of our food systems. What are the impact pathways by which agroforestry and forests influence food security and nutrition for different groups of people at different scales? And what are the most effective actions that would provide food security and nutrition by leveraging the role of agroforestry in landscape in local and global food systems? And lastly, what are the knowledge gaps? What are the main demands, needs for stakeholders and capacity building and policy? How do we better inform policymakers and practice? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramni. Cinderella crops, wild foods. You know, when you talked about wild foods, I was thinking of a rather extraordinary young man who's here somewhere, Joseph Garvey, le Nigérien blanc. Could you stand up? Could you stand up? This guy is running an entire company devoted to the modern marketing of wild foods in Niger called Sahara Sahel Foods. A round of applause for Joseph. And now, being a lazy chair, it is my immense pleasure to hand the baton back to Karen, who is going to run a little question and answer session before we go into our sub-panel.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Patrick. And thanks to you, Ramni, and to Sol for some very, very interesting and stimulating presentations and interesting information. So let's maybe get a sense of your views or questions now that you would like to put to our panelists. I know it's always a brave person who puts their hand up first, but we've had a lot of interesting discussions and information. So we have a number of hosts with microphones in the room, and we have we'll give about 10 minutes for questions. So ladies and gentlemen, who would like to ask a question or make a comment on the presentations made so far? Raise your hand up high so that I can see it. Don't be shy. Gentleman down here, well done, first person. So can we get a microphone to this gentleman down here? Just if you can stand up, because it's a large room, so just to make sure that the hosts can see you. Even better, that's well done, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Stéphane Lamana, I'm from Quebec, Canada. I'm a beekeeper and mycoculturer. I cultivate mushrooms. I just want to know, on all what we've seen this morning, seems that there's not enough humidity to grow mushrooms on these places, and mushrooms must, je pourrais le dire en français,
Well, oui, yes, you
Alors,
can speak in
les
French.
champignons pourraient améliorer beaucoup la croissance des arbres. Et puis, est-ce que c'est étudié ou est-ce que c'est adressé dans certaines études? Mushroom can help grow the growth of the trees. Is it addressed or studied in these persons' places? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll like to keep the questions specifically for the two speakers who've just delivered a speech. So Ramni, do you want to take that? You haven't worked with mushrooms. So, okay. Saul, would you be able to? Okay.
Well, I can say to that we have an entire research program devoted to mushroom cultivation in Yunnan in in southern China. Beyond that, either of you, what about the nutritional characteristics of mushrooms?
So it's interesting, they weren't included in the reference diet, if I remember rightly, probably because there's relatively few studies looking at trying to isolate the impact of the consumption of mushrooms on health status indicators over the longer term. It would be probably quite hard to pull out such a specific food group, but it would be interesting to know, yeah.
Okay, so question specifically for Saul and Ramni. Who else would like to? Yes, lady over here. So if you wouldn't mind standing up, just to make sure the hosts can see you, a microphone down here. Great. And for those at the back, it's difficult to see you, so the best thing is to stand up for the host to see you. Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm Prosi from Uganda, work with Makerere University. I'm very interested in the issue of the vegetables and the fruits losing taste. And that actually explains part of the reason why a number of us, including me, may not be interested in some fruits that are not as sweet as they used to be, and the flavors of the vegetables. What exactly is on ground that the researchers are doing to make sure that the flavors and the tastes are actually being restored to ensure that we increase on the consumption of the fruits and vegetables? Thank you.
Okay, very interesting. So the flavors are actually going down. They're not as flavorful, you're saying, as they used to be. Yeah. Oh, very interesting. Okay. Saul, Ramni. Ramni, do you want to take that?
Well, I can just tell you that in our breeding program in African Orphan Crops Consortium, we find one of the biggest gaps is characterization of a lot of the varieties and land races that are out there. And all I can say is perhaps the selection for yield or bigger vegetable has, the trade-off has been the taste. It's not an area we're looking at now, but once we have sequenced all this and it is in the public domain, we hope that national institutes like Makerere, for example, will look at their vegetables and see what's happening there at the genetic level. That will be able to explain it. Right now, we don't have, actually, African fruits and vegetables have not been characterized.
Okay, thank you for that. And we'll just take one more question. Does anybody else have a question? Oh yes, lady over here. So if we can get the microphone. If I can take your question later, sir, and if we just go to the lady at the very end with the nice sun hat. So hand up, yes. Okay, great. We'll take this question and then we'll
Yes,
move on
my
after
name is
this.
Severine. I'm a young farmer in the US. I'm here with the Savannah Institute. There's a lot of young people in the US, in the world. We all are wishing that we could be planting trees and be remunerated fairly. We need to talk about new customary rights so that we can plant trees on land that we cannot own. The land is owned by the people with money and equity, and those of us who are young ones, we have much work we could be doing. I hope that we can discuss some practical methods to bring new customary rights into this conversation of agroforestry. Thank you.
Okay, really good comment. Thank you very much for that. Again, Saul, Ramli, I don't know if you want to comment specifically on that? Well, I could. Just take the microphone. Yes, thank you.
I totally agree with you. And, while you're from US, I find it strange hearing that from you. In Africa, or in Asia, the problem is land tenure, land rights, and then why would people want to grow trees that are going to take 25 years on land that might get snatched away? So that's a huge, and really, this whole session is about food security and nutrition, and it's a multi-sectorial issue. So land rights, all these we have to look at it holistically. You're right. And hopefully we'll find a space for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that. We'll have time again to go back to take your questions after the next segment. I'm going to hand over to Patrick again now.
Thank you very much, Karen. Well, I have a research hypothesis. The reason why the French are so healthy, despite their diet high in red wine and butter and cream, must obviously be soupe aux champignons, mushroom soup. So get cracking, scientists. Tell us about the wonders of mushrooms. Our next session, our next subsession, our next subpanel is going to be run by a farmer who also happens to be a CEO. Andrew Campbell has 500 hectares of sheep in a silvopastoral system and runs the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. And he's going to introduce the three colleagues, and together they're going to wow us with their knowledge.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Je serais ravi d'être à Montpellier encore. Yes, I'm going to introduce agroforestry and refer to a number of case studies of work associated with ACR in one way or another. Can I have my slides, please?
Oh, very good. Can we have Andrew's slides, please?
Very good. Encore et encore. So,
just press the green button. Yeah, that'll move the slides forward.
So this is my farm in southeastern Australia to the west of Melbourne, 500 hectares. My family's been farming there since the 1860s. And as you can see, and I've been managing it since 1987, but always from a distance. 500 hectares, about 100 hectares of forestry and 20 hectares of environmental plantings. And there are the beneficiaries of some of our plantings. We grow sheep for wool and for meat. And this is not agroforestry at the field scale, but at the farm scale. Trees for Japanese paper and pines for structural timber. And yes, as a forester, I still enjoy some recreational chainsaw work. The Eat Lancet Commission's already been referred to by Saul. And it's very clear when you read the report. You can quibble about the way livestock's treated, perhaps insufficient differentiation between rich countries and low and middle income countries, the extent to which planetary boundaries apply to things like nitrogen and phosphorus as compared with obviously carbon and oceans. We can quibble about all of those, but I think that in years to come we'll see that this really set an important agenda in showcasing how big the food system is in its impact on the planet. And my thesis is, as we've heard this morning from Christian and others, as we're now in the Anthropocene where humans are the dominant change agent and influencing the basic geophysical processes of the planet, the single biggest lever that humanity can pull is farming systems, agriculture. That's the biggest thing we do. It employs the most people, uses most water, will soon be the biggest emitting sector. Emissions intensity is going down in energy, it's going down in transport, it's still going up in ag and food. It's the biggest driver of deforestation, notwithstanding some of the wonderful case studies we've heard today. And it's the single most effective way of lifting people out of poverty, improving agricultural productivity. Now, on my farm, you saw some of those pines that I'd planted before. Well, and Rowan many years ago helped me with a silvicultural plan that said we would keep those pines for 30 to 35 years. Well, this year I harvested them at 18 years because the price was good and I needed the money. I got $12,000 per hectare net for these pines because I'd like to buy a house without going into too much debt. I think the same sorts of decision making apply for farmers all around the world. So my thesis and the thesis of this little set of talks, there's been a lot of lamenting as to why, if agroforestry is so good, why isn't everyone doing it? I believe agroforestry can save the world. It's one of very few win-win-win-wins, as Chad outlined earlier.
across food and water and nature and climate. But there are very good reasons why it's not being adopted at scale. And in my view, the only way we can understand that is to look at it from the farmer perspective in the context of the individual farmer. And so I'm going to introduce three colleagues now who in succession will give you different lenses for looking at the wonderful diversity of agroforestry work around the world and the farmer perspective. And I must say, from an ACR perspective, and please check out our stand, I could have chosen projects from Nepal, Vietnam, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea. Please taste our canarium nuts, the Pacific, Indonesia. But we're hearing from Dr. Catherine Mathuri about trees for food security in East Africa. Dr. Cami Malvani, who's just received a letter from the university to say that she's passed her PhD. I was aware... I want this audience to know about Cami's data set in Sri Lanka. And at the time, she was just a PhD student. And I'm very pleased to say now we will be hearing from Dr. Cami. And Rowan Reid and I did undergraduate forestry together 40 years ago. And a lot of people should see what Rowan's done in his farm and in his education work in that time. So I'd like to invite Catherine to get going, and then I'll come back at the end. Thank you. Here you are.
Thank you, Andrew. I stand here to speak on behalf of farmers in the countries we are working in. Just waiting. Okay, I talk about the livelihoods and the wider social benefits from the project I manage called the Trees for Food Security in Ethiopia. And there you can see a happy lady in a rural resource center in Ethiopia. Now, where the project operates, the project operates in Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Uganda. It is a 4-year project, and in its second phase, it's funded by the Australian Centre of International Agriculture Research, and the main aim is actually to improve food security of smallholder and their livelihoods, and this is by using agroforestry practices, which are locally adopted. Now, we do this with an area of partners spanning from development partners, research institutions, and universities. And we are operating in both dry, in semi-arid areas of Ethiopia and Rwanda, and also in the humid areas. Now, this is a research in development project, and therefore we have a theory of change, and the theory of change spans from the first phase of the project, which started in 2012, and from the initiatives that we started in that, we have activities in the second phase. I may not talk about all the activities in the second phase, but it's important to note that we have research spanning from modeling and widespread trials, which we have set up. We have issues on value chains. We are looking at academic programs in view of having innovative agroforestry curricula. We are establishing communities of practice. And one of the issues we are facing, the challenges we are facing in that place is food degradation. And therefore, we are looking at grazing, which is a big challenge in Ethiopia, and water resources. Now, the context of this project is such as there is a lot of degradation. We are working in fragile ecosystems. The variability, and that's why we use options by context. It's not a one-fits-all situation. We have low quality of germplasm, and we don't have enough quantities, neither do we have the right diversity. There are gaps in terms of the institutions, in terms of agroforestry, and the demands of tree products is very high. Now, so I'll talk about 3 aspects of this project which resonate well with food security. The first being the rural resource centers. We have established 6 rural resource centers, and 5 are going through. The first is in Burundi, which is not a second phase country, and we have 5 rural resource centers. And why would you establish rural resource centers? It is to address the issue of quality, quantity, and diversity of seedlings. And in addition to that, training. So we have established, 1.8 million seedlings which have been produced in the last 2 years within the project across the 3 countries. And the interesting thing about the Rural Resource Center is that we are finding more and more women participating in this endeavor. For instance, in Rwanda, we have the ratio of 1:1 in terms of participation of stakeholders. We have trainings, we are undergoing a lot of trainings, and peer learning is happening. And this slide also shows that fruit trees and diversity range is quite broad. Now, you can see that is the happy rural resource centers, farmers celebrating in Rwanda. Now, in Ethiopia, I single out Ethiopia because RRC is a business, it's a way of partnerships and scaling. We started the first rural resource center in 2015 through the support of ACR, and we are having 10 members run that rural resource center, and they are using it as a business. When it became a success, we then replicated another one in the next site, which is Bako. And many partners and government officials are keen to take up this. And so we got a request for Irish aid, and they were able to set up another rural resource center in Tigray. And the rural resource centers are supporting the participatory trials we are holding with farmers. So it is a cycle, having the appropriate species and propagating many. Now, an inspiring story about nutrition and food security is from the tree tomato. I don't know how many of you know tree tomato. If you go to Rwanda, you get a refreshing glass of tree tomato juice. This helps to address a challenging problem, which is food insecurity and nutrition. And why tree tomato? The nutrition levels are high, and we find that from the testimonies of farmers, that has changed their lives. We also have climbing beans. Climbing beans yields in Rwanda are low, and it is only grown, climbing beans are grown in restricted areas because of lack of stakes for climbing beans. So the project, through the initiative of the project, we've been able to provide alternative stakes for climbing beans by use of other species like Acacia agostissima. We have used, and this has saved penicetum, which has been used previously because of the policy of 1 cow per family, which also addresses the issue of nutrition in Rwanda. And what we need to understand about climbing beans, they are 50% to 200% higher yields compared to bush beans. So it's an investment worth. It wasn't growing just like tree tomato. Climbing beans were only growing in one region of where we operate the project, but through the project initiatives, we have been able to introduce climbing beans into Bugesera district, and the yields are amazing because we are able to get 0.9 tons per hectare compared to the 0.4 to 0.6 they were getting from bush beans. Now, this increases household income, and as you can see, if you talk to farmers in Rwanda, mothers are able to dress better. They will tell you that they are able to, take children to school. They are able to refurbish their houses, and they are taking, they say they are less dependent. And with this, if you can have a farmer's confidence get up, that is an inspiration to all of us. In addition to the stakes for climbing beans, farmers are able to get firewood, green manure, and fodder. Now, this project has so much to offer, and you can refer to the website. We have a project web page, and we also have a dataverse, because spanning from upstream modeling, participatory trials, and extension approaches, then we are linked to FTA because FTA supported us. So I tell the story of a farmer, not in Kinyarwanda, or in Amharic, or in Kiswahili if it is a Ugandan farmer, but I tell it as it is because I am a farmer myself, and I interact with them on the day-to-day basis. So I thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you very much. A fascinating project, Catherine, but one that made you go 2.5 minutes over time. We're going to have to get that time back somehow.
Yeah, so the green moves it forward and the red moves it back. There you go.
Ayubovan, which in Sinhala means may you all live long.
Very good.
So my talk today is about tree-dominated land holdings and how they ensure food and nutritional security in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a small tropical island. It is a global biodiversity hotspot. It has wet, intermediate, and dry agroecological zones. It is densely populated, is heavily reliant on agriculture, and has, as of 2017, a global food security index of 53. 100 is the most favorable. Now, the rationale I use in this study is that several food and nutritional security assessments, are currently aligned with agrobiodiversity, dietary diversity, and nutrition. However, land use, and that 22% of Sri Lanka's land area is under tree-dominant agriculture, these are not considered. Equally not considered are rainfall seasonality, crop reproductive phenology, and productive duration of crops. Now, if all these factors were to have been considered, the food security index may be different. So my hypothesis is that tree-dominant land holdings provide food and nutritional security to Sri Lankan farming households across seasons and across time. So the research questions I've posed are: how many crops are found in crop categories across land holdings in locations, and what are their users? What are the nutritional values of crops? What are the yielding profiles of crops in categories across seasons in the reference year and across 100 years? The methods I used: I selected 85 farmer land holdings across 9 locations in the intermediate agroecological zone in Sri Lanka. I carried out floristic inventories in all land holdings, every plant, every crop, and looked at the crops harvested specifically in the reference year, that was 2012-2013, and thereafter categorized them by the time of first return or first yield. Subsequently, I carried out household income and expenditure surveys to record the crops consumed and sold, and created 3 major databases for crop utilities, nutrient values, and phenology. The results: there were 222 crops. Of the 222 crops, 95 crops, or 43%, were from the long-term category. Is a slide missing here? Sorry. One thing to tell you, and I've forgotten here, there are 4 categories of crops: very long-term crops, or more than 20 years, long-term crops between 1 and 20 years, short-term crops between 6 and 12 months, and very short-term crops, which is less than 6 months. So the long-term crops were timber crops, very long-term crops were timber crops, long-term crops were fruit trees, nut trees, spice trees, short-term crops were yams and bananas, for example, and the very short-term crops were annual vegetables or leafy vegetables. So the results, as I said, 222 crops, 95 crops, long-term crops, followed by 75 crops, or 33% of the total, and 75% of all 222 crops were food crops. That is 165 crops. Of the 165 crops, 51% of all these crops were consumed. 49% of the food crops were sold to generate income. Of the food crops, the highest numbers were the fruit category, followed by leafy vegetables and vegetables. I must tell you at this point, Sri Lankans eat almost every leaf they can find. So, because of that, if I looked at the nutritional values, aside from the macronutrients of carbohydrates, protein, and fat, what was interesting was the micronutrient crops were mostly dominated or mostly relegated in the long-term category and the very short-term category. And interestingly, after having listened to Ramani and the previous speakers, we have actually done this business of yielding profile of crops. We already have a portfolio of crops. Not that we have made it, but farmers have been doing this for over thousands of years in Sri Lanka. So what I did was, I looked at the categories of long, short, and very short-term crops. I looked at their phenology and distributed this according to the 4 rainy seasons or 4 climatic seasons we have in Sri Lanka, 2 wet and 2 dry. And guess what? Farmers in Sri Lanka, farming households don't have a hunger season. There is no shortage of food in a dry season. Farmers have long, short, and very short-term crops throughout the year. However, long-term crops are mostly time dispersed. That means that they are continuously harvested throughout the year, as you can see. Every column is a crop, and every row is a time, month. Whereas the short-term crops are time concentrated, or they're sporadic, or harvested at particular times, mainly rainfall periods. Then I looked at the same data over a period of 100 years. Say, suppose, a farmer's lifetime. And what did I find? That food was available from the 5th year all the way to the 75th year. Fuel wood was available for 50 years, and if I took examples of crops, Sesbania or Agati, where we eat the flowers and the leaves, between 1 and 15 years, or jackfruit between 4 and 50 years, and coconut between 7 and 75 years. So, ladies and gentlemen, farming households in Sri Lanka have no hunger season, have food throughout their lives. This is not a model. This is real. So my discussion is that farmers cultivated combinations of long and short-term crops using knowledge of plant phenology. Hello? Took me a long time to do this study, indeed. Okay, I'm sorry, but I can't see my slides. Okay. Plant phenology acquired from their ancestors or local experience. Very short and short-term crops were cultivated considering water availability and rainfall, household food and income needs. High agrobiodiversity and diverse phenologies increased food availability and access since multiple crops were harvested simultaneously. High numbers of long-term crops provided greater utilities, reduced risk, and ensured continuous access to food, fuel, wood, and income across annual wet and dry seasons and throughout farmers' lifetimes. And the income earned gave purchasing power if there was an emergency of drought or other. Nutritional security. Households were nutritionally secure because they had access and availability to diverse macro and micronutrient-rich crops throughout the year. Traditional knowledge of crop utilization, we come from the land of Ayurveda, maximized nutritional values and medicinal values. Greater numbers of micronutrient-rich crops had the potential to prevent hidden hunger or micronutrient deficiency. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, farmers juggled combinations of short and long-term crops in landscape designs that provided food and nutritional security across seasons, every month, throughout the year, and potentially accrued in every year of their lifetimes. And so, food security assessments may need to include land use and crop phenology as additional metrics to reflect a more accurate index of food and nutritional security through time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very good, thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I ask the technicians to put the clock back onto the screen so the speakers can see how much time they have left?
And no cartoons, please, during the presentations. Thank you very much. And yeah, you've heard that Andrew and I play on our farms with chainsaws. This is a 30-year-old tree that we planted back in 1987. And we're just harvesting this last December, and that's the impact that we were looking for, was it? The logs were pulled out, milled on our sawmill, and dried in our kiln, and then sold for high-quality furniture, which is just in the showroom last week in Melbourne. It is a long story, but the reason we planted that tree was not for timber. That's the land that Claire and I bought back in 1987. It had very few trees on it, and it obviously had, as everyone knows, a need for trees. I'm Rowan Reid. I've lectured at Agroforestry at Melbourne University for 30 years, and now the director of the foundation in Australia. But I've been working in this area trying to explore how farmers could be enticed because forestry is attractive onto their farm. So this property clearly needs trees, as it was back in 1987. We plant trees for conservation, agriculture, particularly shade and shelter, for stock, and also for aesthetics, but all those trees are managed for some sort of commercial return, particularly the timber, but also other crops. Farm after 14 years of tree growing, some of the systems in various parts of the property, and we've got over 70 species that are all fitted in and serving a primary purpose, the reason they were planted, but then ultimately managed for some high-value product. The reason I did this was because our farming landscape needs trees. It's because farmers and their families are ultimately the ones who decide whether trees will go on their farm, and because conventional models of agroforestry, research and development, don't work. And this will offend some people, but I just don't think best models fit in the farming landscapes are too diverse, and I'm particularly concerned about the use of cost-share models and incentives around the world. They do not fuel spontaneous investment and decision-making by farmers. So I've been exploring and supporting a different way of looking and working with farmers in agroforestry in Australia, one that I hope listens to what the farmers' aspirations are. In Australia, we've had many surveys of what farmers are interested in. This is generally the results, very commonly shade and shelter. Trees that support their agricultural enterprises are right at the top. Other values, land protection, biodiversity and aesthetics, fall down. And for those of us involved in timber, I often look at those low figures and say, how can we move them to the top? Clearly, to move those low figures to the top is to link them with the other reasons that farmers want trees in the short to medium term. And you'll also notice if you put those figures together, they're well over 100%. So we're talking about multifunctional landscapes where trees serve many purposes and fit together neatly on each individual farm. That property, run by Jenny in Western Australia, did our Master Tree Grower program that I'll talk about shortly, went back 10 years later, and I could see how she'd used knowledge to fit trees into a landscape that didn't mimic any particular model that any research organisation had been promoting at the time. You can see the values of recreation, aesthetics, biodiversity, timber production, shade and shelter has been acted on her own landscape in that fashion. The second one is to promote a design process, not a model. This is Andrew Stewart. His primary concern is his sheep production. He designed a shelter belt here that has timber production, biodiversity, flowers for sale production, and he's basically got 17% of the farm planted to trees now. He calls it his web of trees or biological infrastructure, and he's been able to maintain agricultural production, not only at the same level, but avoid the falls and associated with bad weather events. Use science to inform those farmers' decision making, not science to design best bet demonstration sites. Involve farmer-led agroforestry networks. This is our own community group, 150 farming families in our area that Andrew and I set up over 20 years ago. Use farmer education models that actually listen. They're not just about training, they're actually guiding and supporting decision making. And the one we developed was the Master Tree Grower program that's gone around Australia and now into Africa, Timor-Leste, Indonesia, and a week or so ago I got back from Vanuatu as well, where we're using the same model. Now I don't understand much about the species, but the educational model seems to fit very well. Support farmer-to-farmer mentoring. Everyone knows that farmers learn from other farmers, but how do we invest and improve the quality of that discussion? In our community, we train and then pay farmers to talk to other farmers. They get no free trees, no free fencing materials. We pay them to talk to each other, to communicate and to share ideas. And we're now extending that program with ACR support into Indonesia, our farmer-to-farmer training programs. And profitability. Change the notion of what it actually means. Discounted cash flow analysis doesn't mean a lot. I planted a tree before our first child was born and harvested it after he was 30 years old. You didn't do a discounted cash flow analysis to work out whether that was useful. What I actually like being in France, this story about the man who planted trees. The author actually said after the book was released and became popular, he was trying to make trees planting likeable because it certainly isn't profitable. There's more rational reasons why not to plant trees than to plant trees. Tree growing is like building a house. And in that sense, it's a capital investment, not a cash flow business. You're actually planting trees because you need trees on your farming landscape to support what you currently do. You own them and retain them and are happy to wait for the trees to develop because you like having them, because they support what you do and you enjoy the range of benefits they provide. And you harvest because you can, and in doing so, you're not undermining the reason you planted. It's pretty ridiculous to use the old forestry model, harvest and start again when you spent all that time building a capital asset on the farming landscape. So agroforestry for me is like teaching someone how to paint and not telling them what to paint. And I think too much in agroforestry research and extension particularly, we're out there telling them what to do on their land before we even ask questions about what they need and how they would measure their own success. The diversity of agroforestry systems that you'll see in our landscape if you visit reflects the diversity of people. Some have got a higher interest in some species, conservation, different planting arrangements, lower or higher attitude to risk. The farmers themselves are the demonstration. I hate demonstration sites with signs saying this is how to do agroforestry. We have 150 families who provide a demonstration to their neighbours that agroforestry is a flexible opportunity to make trees work for you in any landscape. So help the farmers achieve their goals and yours, whether they be biodiversity, carbon sequestration, animal welfare, or whatever the great values of trees might be, will follow through the actions that we actually allow farmers to make decisions on their property. So thank you very much.
So I hope people can see we've got very different contexts there. High-income countries in Australia, Africa, South Asia, and I hope that you can see that notwithstanding different context, if you look at it from a farmer perspective, agroforestry might look quite different than top-down models that we might be trying to force other people to see the wisdom of. So Patrick, you want to facilitate some questions?
I would be delighted. Can I have a coconut on my head, please? Andrew, trees as security. You know, I used to think that this idea that people put trees down in order to pay for a funeral or marriage was typically the sort of thing you did in a poor country. But you've done it yourself. And you're the CEO of a major institution. And you still planted trees for security and sold them because you needed money to build a house. How common is that kind of thinking still amongst farmers in Australia?
I think it's common in farmers everywhere. It's a bit in Africa, Catherine would say, livestock can be the same, seen as capital rather than as income. And certainly the timber part of trees is a capital asset. But we also enjoyed the benefits that Rowan was talking about of shelter and other things, and you couldn't see it on the photos, but there's biodiversity plantings around the edges. So they do perform multiple benefits, but knowing it's there, a bit like superannuation as a capital asset that's appreciating, is a very nice thing.
It is a very nice thing. And Catherine, I bet you were jealous of Kamal. Humid tropics. It's so easy not to go hungry is the lesson I draw from that. You have hundreds of trees and food crops, and you can plant them any which way you like, and you can harvest them all year round, and it's highly nutritious, and it's highly diverse, and it sounds like paradise on earth. What's the catch?
And Cami, can I just follow up? The forest gardens of Sri Lanka are obviously a wonderful agroforestry system, but is the government promoting that system or promoting much more simple forms of agriculture?
Okay, first question for Patrick. We have the year in which I did not say this, but the year in which I collected the data was an El Nino year for Sri Lanka, where the farmers suffered 10 months of drought and 3 months of the most unbelievable rainfall. So those 166 food crops were those harvested with 10 months of drought.
Wow.
That is something for you all to think about, ladies and gentlemen. To answer your question, sorry, no escape there, gentlemen. Andrew, to answer your question, forest gardens have been in Sri Lanka forever. And they are what we call, in accounting framework, a biological asset with a net realizable value. I will talk of that tomorrow. So governments don't want to play them down. Yes, they are promoting cash crops, but not at the detriment of forest gardens.
So your Minister of Agriculture is not saying get rid of all this rubbish and plant rice instead?
If he did that, he wouldn't get his vote.
Marvelous. We'll move on to questions from the audience, but before that, I just wanted to commend Rowan for those wonderful sentences. You plant trees because you need them. You own them because you like them. And you harvest them because you can. That is the best summary of agroforestry I've heard in a long time. Thank you very much. Karen, would you please get our audience to...
Yes, thank you, Patrick. And maybe go back to you, because you have been taking copious notes and have a very good sense of the questions to ask as well. Let's take some comments from, or questions from, all of you out here. So, gentlemen here, so can we get a microphone down here? And just to let you know, the lights are coming down strong here, so for those at the back, make sure you raise your hand so that I can see you. And hosts and hostesses, maybe you can make sure you tell me when there's somebody at the back as well. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Sunil from India. My question has two parts. One is to Remni. See, we talked about wild fruits, nutritional values and all that. But see, 150, 200 years back, probably we were in the mode in which we were consuming a lot of wild fruits. And then we moved to a more intensively managed horticulture crops and the fruits. Now, what are the factors which will again take us back to that level of consumption of wild fruits? Because we have come out from there. So that is one part of the question. The second part of the question is, see, if I am a farmer, I will not grow wild fruits because somebody needs it. I am going to, see, because in developing countries, the land is in a kind of a short supply. So I am going to grow those crops or those fruits which have an end use, which has a market and can bring income to me. So how do we really reconcile these two facts together? Thank you.
Okay, so Ramni, I think you're the first question, certainly, yes. Yeah, thank you. Can we just get this microphone going, please? Yeah, just, you can talk into it again. I think it might be on now. Is this mic working? Is there another one working? And we'll give it to, oh.
Hello.
Yep, there it is, good. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, good questions. And I did mention that wild fruits or transient wilds, which are semi-domesticated, they've been part of cultures for hundreds of years, but many of them have stayed wild, and those species where there has been investment for hundreds of years, again, apples, oranges, wheat, rice, they've made it into food systems. They're mainstreamed into food systems. And what I was saying, one of the problems of lack of diversified diets and evidence shows it, that micronutrient malnutrition sets in when you have simplified diets. So so what's the way forward is not to go back, but to bring these species forward too, by actually breeding them, improving them, domesticating them, bringing awareness to people, the value of these species. I mean, getting private sector involved, because really, I think one of the culprits is the private sector, who are promoting those 10 species all along, the seed companies. Let's improve these wild species that have been there, part of the culture. Let's develop markets for them. Markets are there when the product is there, like I showed for one of the species. They're looking for the product. The market's already there, but the product is not ready. And yet, there's a huge demand for it. So what are they doing? Going into the forest and taking the fruits from the forest. That's going to be a big challenge. So it's not about going back. It's bringing these species forward, yeah?
Okay, and Saul, you wanted to add to that, yes?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the example of the cocoyam leaves that I showed on my slide. So I think that's very, very instructive. When I first went to Ghana, which was my first job, everybody ate cocoyam, and it was a hugely popular food. And when I went back last year to visit these cocoa-producing communities, they told me, this food is for goats. We don't touch it. We have created a completely different concept of what is an aspirational food. And we need to be aware of what a strong impact we're having on food systems when we pass these messages. Apples are the aspirational fruit in Ghana. Apples cost an absolute fortune to bring from Europe or North America or South Africa to Ghana when the whole country is full of local fruits. And I'm afraid that the slide that was put up before, the joke about this is how you get a child to eat fruits by teaching their value, this is exactly how you do not get a child to eat fruits. We have to be very smart about the way that we use marketing insights to help people aspire towards foods which are also healthy. And that's going to require humor and a lot of good marketing insights, such as been recently done in the United Kingdom with a campaign called Veg Power, which is the first time that a campaign has tried to promote nutritious foods, fruit and vegetable, and been very successfully done.
Okay, very good. And Patrick, who will take who do you want for the second part of the question? Or the second, there were two parts. Does anybody? No?
No.
Okay, so...
I would just perhaps point out the key word that Ramni said. Malnutrition sets in on simplified diets. And we heard this morning, and we will hear again, that land degradation, erosion, all the illnesses of modern agriculture sit in on simplified farming systems. There is a lesson here. Complexity is good. Aspirational foods is another one. I have a marketing and lobbying background, so I completely agree with you and emphasize with you, and my heart bleeds when I hear that apples, which are basically sugar bombs without that many nutritional benefits, are now replacing some of the absolutely extraordinary fruits that we hear in Ghana. And here we are mostly scientists, and we are looking at the science of agroforestry, and perhaps in 5 years' time when we meet again, we should have some marketeers here as well.
Okay, Catherine, yes.
Yes, I wanted to say that really we are not promoting one species. We have both indigenous and exotic tree species, fruit trees. We have oranges, we are doing a lot of avocado and tree tomato and mango, but we also have the indigenous fruit trees. So in those rural resource centers, we are encouraging farmers who already have that to bring them in, and they are part of the portfolio we have within the rural resource centers. But the more important thing is that we have set-rate nurseries. Now, set-rate nurseries is after learning from the rural resource centers, they are able to start their nurseries and incorporate indigenous fruit trees and vegetables. In the system, you don't only recommend fruit trees, you recommend like climbing beans. So in a system, if you go to a farmer, you are not going to a farmer in a smallholder African setting and find just an orchard of fruit trees. You have tree tomato, under tree tomato you have pumpkin, you have climbing beans, and that is a systems approach. And when we go out there, that is the message we should have. Agroforestry is a system.
Okay,
Thank you.
very good. And Ramni, you just wanted to come back on a point that was made there.
Yeah, just to add, one of the key challenges, Sunil, I think that's what his name was, about going backwards and forwards. I think going forward, one of the bottlenecks for diversification of systems, whether we're using exotic species or indigenous species, in many of these developing countries, is access to good quality planting material. That is a big bottleneck, and we experience that in a lot of our projects. And we really do need to develop the infrastructure where quality seed will be made available. And whether it's in smallholders' hands or it's in the public or it's the government, and we are trying to do that for some species in Ethiopia with some of our work. But really, that is, if we want access to good nutrition and good foods and diversified diets, let's get those seed systems right as well, because major bottleneck.
Okay, very good. So let's take, yes, I see a lady's hand up there, and let me see if I can see some other hands up. Make sure the host as well, that you can keep an eye on those who are asking questions. Are you standing because you have a question as well? Okay, so let's take the lady's question first, and then we'll take yours. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Rose Hogan. I'm from TROCRA. It's an international development agency from Ireland. I'm their Sustainable Agriculture Advisor. And my question comes on foot of the last two responses, and it's about the dependency on nurseries and seed beds for propagating trees, and how much is ICRAF promoting farmer-managed regeneration and farm design, going and looking at what's actually on the farm at the moment and what are the species there that can be allowed to grow within the cropping plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take the gentleman who was standing up, we'll take your question as well. Yes. Yes. No, there was a gentleman who was standing up. We'll take your question as well. Do you have the microphone?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Ashok Kumar from India. First of all, I feel the presentations have been wonderful, but I have a point to mention, particularly with the presentations of Ramani and Malwani. I feel this forum is the right forum to have some kind of easy exchange of germplasm, so that the issues have been discussed here would be really shorted out to a longer, level. And I therefore feel, a dynamic group of people sitting on the dais could think about having a very easy policy of germplasm exchange, maybe bilateral as well as multilateral. That would solve a very, very long problem. I can give an example of India. For example, eucalyptus and populus, they have changed the whole scenario of agroforestry in the country. So there could be many more examples whereby such exchange could help a lot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Two questions there. And can I just ask the hosts to stand by the person who wants to ask the question, please, because it's impossible for me to be able to see the entire floor. So let's, Patrick, who do you want to direct the first question about the dependency in nurseries, etc.?
Nurseries versus FMNR. I think Catherine is best placed to answer that one.
Yes, thank you for the question. It is noted. We are using a multi-strategy. We have natural regeneration. In Ethiopia, we have parkland systems with Fidebia obida. And in that system, even growing tree survival is very low, from the nursery. So we are promoting natural regeneration. And RRCs are more for training. They are few, so we have a multiplier effect in individual nurseries, cooperative nurseries. So we are using all types of approaches. It's not a one-fits-all situation.
Okay.
And Ramni,
Yeah.
exchanging germplasm.
Yeah, exchanging germplasm, interesting, and a lot of philosophy behind it. The Nagoya protocols and all these protocols of germplasm exchange, while they were supposed to help communities, with their locally adapted planting material, or companies with their improved breeds and varieties, it's also become a big bottleneck. Actually, you're from India, and I've signed 3 germplasm exchange agreements with ICAR. And the bureaucracy was so overwhelming. My ambition was that so many countries in the world have improved mango, improved guava, improved plums, and in Africa you can plant these. Why are we investing so much in breeding these again and again when the shortcut is let's exchange germplasm? It's a big challenge. Eventually I did manage to get some from India, mangoes and lychees, but from a private sector. And I hear that channel's already being blocked. So, exchange of germplasm is very idealistic. I tried to also from Australia. We managed to get from Australia some of their improved grevilleas. So it really depends which country you're dealing with. Latin America, many places is no-no. Ethiopia is no-no. So some countries, it varies, really. I mean, it would be an ideal world if we all exchange germplasm happily and forever after. Yeah, it's not happening.
No. Patrick?
I've heard before from all of my colleagues what a serious issue this is. So let me ask a question. Are there any policemen in the audience? Please stand up. Any police in the audience?
Any police in the audience?
Any police? Any enforcers of rules on genetic exchanges?
I can't see any, Patrick.
You can't see any? Great. In that case, we're amongst friends here.
Oh, here.
Please.
There's a gentleman here.
There's one. Okay, please close your eyes and stop your ears. Everybody else, if you've ever smuggled germplasm through an airport, stand up.
Oh, very good. We have, look at this. Wow.
Yep,
okay.
stand up. All right. So we see we have a serious issue here. We know that the Nagoya Protocol started from the best of intentions, but it has become far too often a bureaucratic nightmare that is preventing farmers and researchers from exploiting the wonderful genetic diversity that our planet offers in order to make it a better place. So, any politicians in the room? You heard the message, I hope.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Now,
just on this stage, I wonder, does Andrew or Rowan, do you want to make any comment on what's been said so far? Yeah?
I'm just glad no Australians stood up there. And in the issue, we've got a lot of bush food development, Australian native food development in Australia. Indigenous communities are fighting hard to own the rights of their food, and this has become a real issue, a sovereign rights issue, and because a succession of international companies are stealing the rights to some of our valuable food that's been farmed or collected indigenously for decades, for obviously millennia. And they suddenly lose that right. Presumably there was some selection and breeding done by them over that period of time, and we're ignoring that. So there is another side to that equation.
Okay, very good. We have time about another 5 to 10 minutes, I think, Patrick. Okay, so who else would like to ask a question? I have to do, oh yes, gentleman there and gentleman here. Okay, do you have a microphone? You do, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Eric from the University of Hohenheim in Stuttgart. Increasingly, when we talk about the subject of scaling up agroforestry, it seems that a lot of attention and emphasis is laid on youth from developing countries. However, as the presenter from Australia showed us, agroforestry also performs really well in temperate regions. So my question really is, how do we bridge this gap in promoting agroforestry such that youth from developed countries will also be involved in grassroots actions and not essentially grow up with a mindset that paying some premium is enough to really address all the benefits that agroforestry offers? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Who wants to answer that? Patrick, who's best placed? Andrew?
Engaging youth. Saul? You were talking about children then and getting them to eat fruits. Youth are just grown-up children.
I don't have a good answer.
Andrew?
I didn't quite get the question.
Okay.
The question was really about engaging youth, wasn't it?
And how to do that at a grassroots level. Catherine, do you want to answer that?
I thought it was about scaling up issues and other things, but the youth questions come up, and that's been interesting just for us recently, particularly because myself and the colleagues that I've been working with in the farming community for 30 years, we were young once when we started, and we're starting to look at, and we're starting to see a group of young people come on, young farmers and those who want to work with farmers joining in and sharing with us. One of my messages is often to scientists, let go of your preferred models. And that is also in a generational change perspective, letting go of some of the things that were important to our generation and inviting those who see opportunities for themselves to come forward. And I'm relishing that because as a young people with a lot of passion to do things with trees that I'd never regarded as useful for my own purposes, but they'll be taking it forward using a different language in many cases, different words, to actually take that forward and engage more people. And with regard to extension and development, and it's also about letting go, as I said, and releasing some of the constraints that seem to be put in. Whenever I talk to a group of farmers, they often assume that I'm going to come in and tell them that I can show them how they'll make more money growing trees than having sheep. And then I basically start by saying I don't think I can. And, obviously it takes 30 years or more to grow some of these species. And then we just turn it around and, as I said, questions. Why would you on your farm want trees? And we should start with that question with all the people of all generations we're working with around the world.
Okay, Catherine and Ramney, I think. Catherine, did you want to add to that?
Well, what I can say is that once youth see sense in business, then they are ready to jump in. And that's why we are targeting youth through the innovative agroforestry curriculum. Because if we have an innovative agroforestry curriculum in the training, then we are influencing them from graduate school and encouraging them to join, agricultural-based courses. Also, use of smartphones. We have realized that in Africa, youth want to use smartphones a lot. So when we collect data using smartphones, they think that is smart and it's trendy, and therefore we have more joining in. In Ethiopia, we are targeting youth, jobless youth, who are really doing other activities outside which are not economical. So when you provide them with a job opportunity in the Rural Resource Center and they are able to grow seedlings and use that as a business, then we are having a lot of them get engaged in agroforestry.
Okay, and to Ramney, and by the way, people weren't laughing at you, they were I don't know if you saw Julian's, I don't know how you come up with those slides, but they're brilliant anyway. Ramney.
Totally different aspect of influencing youth. In some of our programs, actually, the food tree portfolio one, we're developing them in school in school feeding programs where portfolios are being encouraged in some of our projects, and they're provided manuals on nutrition and information around tree foods and the value of tree foods. So totally different.
Okay, thank you. I know there were more of you who wanted to ask questions. We will have loads more time, but I want to hand back to Patrick now for the next segment.
Thank you very much, Karen. What a fascinating conversation we've been having so far. But the most fascinating thing is only just about to happen. We're going to hear from an electrical engineer, a guy who has received massive prizes for computer-aided design, what he thinks of all these tree-loving hippies in this room. Gary May, Chancellor UC Davis. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As was said in my introduction, my name is Gary May. I'm the Chancellor of the University of California at Davis, which is located about 75 miles northeast of San Francisco in California. Agriculture very much defines who we are at UC Davis. We started out, in fact, as a small farm school in 1908. Today, our university is ranked #1 in the United States and #2 in the world for agriculture and forestry, according to the 2019 QS World University Rankings. I'm happy to be here today to learn more about research and promise of agroforestry efforts around the world. I have just about 5 minutes to talk about the untapped potential of agroforestry in the state of California, so I'll do my best to adhere to the time. When I mention California, people usually think about high-tech industry, engineering. California has the 5th largest economy in the world, in fact. It's the birthplace of such high-tech giants as Apple, HP, Google, Cisco, and Salesforce. But California is also the top agriculture producer in the United States. More than 50% of America's fruits and vegetables are grown in California, along with more than 80% of the world's almonds. Agriculture in California is a $50 billion industry that includes 400 different commodities. Our state is the nation's sole producer of many crops of high nutrient value, including artichokes, figs, dates, and walnuts. California is also known for environmental sustainability and leads the U.S. in aggressive climate change policies. In 2006, California adopted its landmark Global Warming Solutions Act. 10 years later, more ambitious targets were established to reduce the state's greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by the year 2030. These efforts have yielded encouraging results. While the state's economy has been growing, carbon emissions have been decreasing. State officials are now looking to farms and forests to mitigate as much as 20% of current emissions levels. And as a result, we're seeing new efforts targeting the ag industry. One example is the Healthy Soils Initiative. This provides funding for conservation management efforts that improve soil health and sequester carbon. The program provides many benefits to growers for climate change adaptation. It's also a way to support the expansion of agroforestry in California. Agroforestry has the potential to help California meet its aggressive climate mitigation targets and ensure long-term soil health and crop viability. In addition, it may help to mitigate wildfire risk and drought impacts. Let me give you just a few examples. California boasts a unique Mediterranean climate. Our agricultural systems are derived from oak savannas and arid lands, and these ecological features hold great potential for agroforestry. For example, introducing agro-silvopastoral systems in our hilly oak savannas can help reduce fire risk. Grazing these managed systems can reduce fuel loads and thereby mitigate the risk of catastrophic fires, which are driven by climate change. Wildfires in California have become the new normal. Last November, we experienced the deadliest fire in state history. The Camp Fire devastated the town of Paradise, killing 85 people, destroying 14,000 homes, and displacing about 35,000 residents. Another example, hedgerows and borders with mixes of perennials and annual species were once prevalent in California. They were largely eliminated in the 20th century. Now they're receiving renewed attention as a way to supply ecosystem services, especially habitat for beneficial insects such as wild pollinators. Riparian planting of native tree species can improve watershed functions to adapt to a changing climate and also have the potential to produce nutrient-rich foods. Finally, California's agricultural sector is based on irrigated croplands with many perennial monocultures. These have the possibilities for agroforestry by developing and grazing understories. Our researchers at UC Davis are seeing some success with sheep grazing in vineyards. Cover crop forage grazing can provide environmental benefits such as sequestering more carbon in the soil and reducing the need for synthetic inputs or fertilizer. As yet, the potential for agroforestry is largely unrealized. But as you can see, California has good political and environmental climate to help further these efforts. At UC Davis, our researchers are studying barriers to adoption and identifying opportunities to identify agroforestry on a larger scale. So we look forward to making progress in the years to come. So thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, Gary. I'm beginning to understand that Davis is, this whole electrical engineering thing, that's just a false flag operation, isn't it? I mean, it's the best agricultural college in the entire United States. Wow, that's fantastic. And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, it is my delight to introduce Patrick Caron, et pour ce faire, je vais passer au français, parce que Patrick représente la distillation du savoir-faire mondial en agroforesterie dans un panel hyper important, la High Level Panel des experts pour le Comité pour la sécurité alimentaire des Nations Unies. Certains d'entre vous ont certainement déjà entendu parler de Olivier de Schutter, qui était, je crois, le holder de ce poste avant toi, et nous serons ravis d'apprendre ce que tu vas nous raconter aujourd'hui. Merci.
Many thanks, Patrick. Merci beaucoup, Patrick. I don't have slides, so you can abuse from drawings, but not too much. Don't kill me with a revelation or revolution of agroforestry. Well, I shift to French. Non, Patrick de Schutter, c'était le rapporteur auprès des Nations Unies. Le comité de le HLPE, je vais en dire un petit peu plus avant ce que c'est, et il est lié directement au comité de sécurité alimentaire des Nations Unies. Mais avant d'y venir, peut-être juste dire, le génie créatif des humains est immense. Après avoir inventé l'agriculture, face à une explosion démographique phénoménale, les humains ont entrepris de moderniser l'agriculture. Ils ont appris à maîtriser les aléas. Ils ont fait progresser les rendements plus vite que la population. Pour cela, ils ont spécialisé, ils ont artificialisé, ils ont ségrégué les espaces, comme nous l'a dit Christian ce matin. Nous en savons les succès, nous savons aussi les problèmes environnementaux, sanitaires et sociaux qui en résultent. Nous savons enfin combien il est nécessaire de transformer pour affronter le futur. L'agroforesterie est sans conteste une des voies prometteuses pour cela. Mais il ne s'agit pas uniquement de remettre l'arbre dans la prairie ou dans la parcelle. Derrière l'itinéraire technique, c'est bien un projet de société dont nous parlons. En 2014, alors le Comité de sécurité alimentaire des Nations Unies avait été créé en 1974, je n'ai pas le rapporteur du droit à l'alimentation. Et en 2014, alors avant tout, il pourra vous paraître étrange, je vais commencer par regarder l'agroforesterie depuis la forêt. Et en 2014, le Comité des Nations Unies pour la sécurité alimentaire, le CSA, ou le CFS en anglais, a demandé à son groupe d'experts de haut niveau, le HLPE, d'identifier le rôle de la forêt pour la sécurité alimentaire. Qu'est-ce que c'est que ce groupe d'experts? C'est un groupe indépendant qui a été créé en 2010 et qui est chargé de comprendre, en mobilisant différentes formes de connaissances et de compétences, les désaccords à propos de sujets délicats pour la sécurité alimentaire au niveau mondial, afin de rendre les controverses fécondes et de stimuler les processus de négociation. En 2017, donc, le 11e rapport du HLPE montre que 1,5 milliard de personnes dans le monde dépendent d'une manière ou d'une autre de la forêt. C'est considérable. Il montre que la forêt n'est pas uniquement une source et une réserve de ressources pour l'expansion agricole. Comme tous mes prédécesseurs l'ont montré, l'arbre et la forêt sont sources d'alimentation, sont sources d'énergie, d'emploi, de revenus, de services écosystémiques qui ont tous un impact à court ou à long terme, directement ou indirectement, sur la sécurité alimentaire. Alors la priorité, le premier des enjeux, au-delà de la diversité des définitions de la forêt, parce que nous savons qu'il y en a de très nombreuses, était d'élaborer une typologie des situations. Et celle-ci souligne le continuum entre forêt et espace agricole, et l'immense rôle de l'arbre hors de la forêt, qu'il s'agisse de mosaïques paysagères, qu'il s'agisse de vergers, de systèmes agroforestiers. Sur cette base, nous avons revisité les processus de compétition entre agriculture et forêt. Nous avons invité à dépasser la fameuse controverse baptisée il y a une dizaine d'années land sparing versus land sharing. Vous vous rappelez, elle opposait d'un côté un modèle de développement fondé sur une intensification agricole maximale permettant de mettre ailleurs la nature sous cloche, et un autre fondé sur l'association d'espèces au sein d'espaces agricoles diversifiés. Les conclusions poussent plutôt à concevoir et promouvoir des institutions visant à réguler localement, nationalement, régionalement, les processus de compétition pour l'usage des terres, en tenant compte des attentes des populations dans la forêt, en marge de la forêt et à distance de la forêt, ainsi que des conséquences environnementales et climatiques. Et puis surtout, pour vous ici, nous avons proposé, dans la 4e recommandation du rapport, de promouvoir la gestion de paysages multifonctionnels. Ce mot multifonctionnel, il y a 20 ans, complètement tabou. Donc la gestion de paysages multifonctionnels qui intègrent la forêt et l'arbre comme éléments clés, et en particulier à investir dans la recherche et la conception de technologies permettant le développement de systèmes agroforestiers durables. Oui, cela vous met au défi ici. Oui, cela nous met au défi. Il ne s'agit pas de recourir à l'arbre tel qu'il était utilisé il y a plusieurs millénaires, mais d'inventer des systèmes répondant aux enjeux du futur. Nous allons dans l'inconnu, et les techniques disponibles, importantes, ne sauraient suffire à relever les défis de demain. Il nous faut concevoir, expérimenter, faire savoir des techniques, mais aussi de nouveaux modes d'agencement et de gouvernance des ressources, au niveau des parcelles, au niveau des territoires, au niveau des pays. Comme cela a déjà été le cas, le rapport mentionnait un exemple en Inde avec une politique en 2014 et un programme agroforestier en France. Et c'est pour accompagner cet effort que nous sommes ici aujourd'hui. Alors j'ai succinctement partagé le point de vue du HLPE vu de la forêt. L'arbre est important, y compris hors de la forêt. Il y a un autre rapport qui est en cours, il n'est pas encore publié. Il s'intéresse à l'agroforesterie vue depuis la sol agricole. Il s'agit du rapport sur l'agroécologie, qui sera publié prochainement et discuté lors de la prochaine plénière du Comité de sécurité alimentaire des Nations Unies à Rome en octobre. Et Fergus Sinclair, qui doit être quelque part dans la salle et qui est le chef de l'équipe de rédaction, nous en dira quelques mots mercredi prochain. Donc je n'en dirai pas grand-chose. Mais je voudrais juste conclure ici avec quelques mots. Ce dont nous traitons ici, ce sont l'ensemble des modèles de développement. Plusieurs d'entre vous en ont parlé avant moi. L'agroforesterie nous invite d'une certaine manière à penser les liens et à lier les processus biologiques et écologiques, les techniques, les modèles d'organisation des territoires et des ressources pour identifier les trajectoires de viabilité de la production et pour, au-delà de la sécurité alimentaire qui retenait notre attention ici, repositionner les systèmes alimentaires au cœur de l'agenda du développement durable, comme nous y invitait Andrew Campbell au début de la séquence. Merci.
Merci.
At one stage, Patrick, you said something absolutely fascinating, that to get beyond sparing and sharing, the evidence shows, and I'm paraphrasing, that the best way to deal with these issues is to set up local institutions to locally manage landscapes for multifunctional outcomes and uses. And I had a picture of Elinor Ostrom coming up in my head. Is that what we're talking about?
Oui, je continue en français ou Bon, je continue en français. Oui, c'est bien à cela que l'on faisait référence, c'est d'arriver à gérer un destin commun, hein, au-delà du bien commun d'Elinor Ostrom, d'arriver à gérer un destin commun par la construction d'institutions qui, effectivement, permettent de construire un avenir commun à un groupe. Et cela vaut au niveau local, cela vaut également à d'autres niveaux. Personnellement, je ne crois pas trop au scaling up, c'est-à-dire à la petite expérimentation que l'on pourrait reproduire à l'identique un peu partout. Il faut le penser au niveau local, mais il faut aussi le penser, tout à l'heure on a parlé des questions de tenure foncière au niveau national, il faut que l'action locale permette de construire et rencontre l'action nationale et l'action internationale, et c'est bien cet enchâssement d'initiatives qui permettent de construire notre bien commun et de gérer des ressources en commun, comme nous y invitait Elinor, qui d'ailleurs a fait une conférence ici, ici. Il y a, si ma mémoire est bonne, en 1989, qu'il faut arriver à promouvoir, et l'agroforesterie est un fantastique substrat pour le faire.
Mais ça devient très très politique alors. Nous avons une tension entre l'État régal, qui veut tout contrôler, et la liberté dont les communautés ont besoin pour développer leur propre système de gestion. Comment est-ce qu'on fait ça en pratique ?
Et c'est une tension féconde, ce n'est pas une opposition. C'est comment les institutions, le territoire en ce sens-là est quelque chose de particulièrement intéressant, puisque fondé sur l'action collective, il permet de construire des institutions qui vont pouvoir de transformer et de penser l'action publique et de connecter l'action collective à l'action publique, et vice-versa. Comment c'est local ou comment c'est global, comment c'est collectif ou comment c'est public, il faut que les deux puissent se rencontrer.
Andrew.
Yes, we have something that started in Australia about 30 years ago called land care groups, where we have neighbourhood groups of people working together at a landscape scale, but from a social driver to work together. And Cami has worked in that area also in Sri Lanka. Rowan's Agroforestry group is also a land care group. So it's how groups of farmers at a community level can think about the future of the landscape that they want and then translate that into the production systems that meet their goals. And I think Landcare is now working in about 22 countries around the world, some cases in post-conflict situations to get communities working together again, sometimes post-natural disaster, in other cases just where you have a common problem like a pest or a disease or something that rewards the building of social capital. And I think it's this well-informed social capital that we're aiming for here, to try and think about new ways of socially constructing landscapes. Did you want to add anything, Cami or Rowan?
Yeah, the land care model is fantastic, and especially when it's applied overseas. It's fallen into a bit of a bureaucracy back home, and it becomes a way of channeling government funds into subsidies, which is a bit of a concern. It was interesting for our group, which is now, I argue, one of the largest, possibly the largest land care group in the country, where people have to pay to actually join, that many in the land care movement don't want us to be part of the land care movement because we chop trees down. So it's a message about the production side or the profit side of conservation, and marrying the two together and getting people to understand that the profit can be a driver of the conservation outcomes. And we've still got a way to go to get the wider community to accept that in our country, and I suspect many countries.
Thank you, Rowan. Karen, I am sure that there are burning questions out there.
Well, there may be, but we don't have time now because we've come to the end of this session. But I want to say a very big thank you to Patrick for chairing an excellent session, and to his wonderful panel of guests. Thank you very much.